Uh-oh. This is for posterity. Well, friends, we're very happy to have Lisa with us for this last session of what I think has been a really important study for many of you. Ecclesiastes, not a very widely covered book, typically. So you've probably had some exposure to stuff that you've never had exposure to, which is good. And we had some different approaches this time, which is real common. So we're just happy to have had Lisa with us in person once, had a couple of sessions with Justin, and now welcoming Lisa back for this closing session. So a reminder, if you were off getting coffee or whatever, you will, if you want to speak, you will absolutely have to use the microphone, or Lisa won't be able to see you or hear you. She'll be able to see you, the back of your head anyway. And if you want to come up here and speak, you could speak to the camera, and then Lisa will see your face. It's kind of an awkward setup this morning. So without any further ado, Lisa.
Hi. Hey, I just realized we forgot to set something up, which is making sure that I can share my screen. What?
Yeah, we're doing that right now.
Oh, okay. Great. So I had given you all a bit of homework. Okay, there we go. The homework was to discover where are the women hiding in Ecclesiastes. And so I just want to start off taking some notes to find out what you all came up with and any other questions that you have for me today. So don't trample each other getting to the microphones.
Violet, if you came up with this, you get up there and talk about where the women are.
Oh, so I can't hear you unless you're talking right into the microphone. So go on up to the front.
Somebody. Oh, Violet, you're good. Go. No, I don't want to be the one to go first. Thank you so well. Yeah.
Well, now I can hear you.
Well, this was a whole interesting to look at it because see, I'm a trans woman, so I was socialized as male. So a lot of the stuff that women face, I've never faced, like pregnancy and menstruation and all of that. But I've also, faced like sexism and such. And so it was really interesting to kind of wrap my head around everything. So in that chapter with the first part of chapter 8, that's the pretty looked at as the pretty misogynist section. I've kind of flipped it and looked at it through a queer lens. And if you look at it that way, it sounds like a manifesto for some older school lesbians that were very virulently anti-male. And as a result, were also anti-trans women and didn't like any of us because they thought we were just men invading women's spaces. And so it was just, yeah. And then the roots of that, of course, now have become some of the roots of the modern day transphobia. So
that's really interesting perspective. Thank you. So you mentioned, I think you're meaning chapter 7. You mentioned chapter 8, but I think that that part that's usually seen as very misogynistic is chapter 7. So
Yeah.
that's a great place to find some women hiding. Yeah, fantastic. Great. Somebody else? Any other places you found women hiding in Ecclesiastes? Or general questions?
I got to read some of your commentary. I was really impressed with, it seems like with the feminist hermeneutic, it's like if there's a will, there's a way. And I was impressed with, it seems like a lot of the interpreters have found new ways of analyzing, like besides the colonialism, the performance and other sort of ways of reading the text to try to find the hidden women. I was wondering if you would say a little bit about that, because it looks like to me that the feminist interpreters have really made a significant contribution to biblical studies in general. That, old school, like, there's form, redaction, criticism, all those. And to me, the feminist interpreters have added a lot more to the toolbox of biblical interpretation. So I found that fascinating.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, I will touch on several of the insights I gained from various types of criticism, but I like how you referred to the sort of old school standard types of biblical criticism. And that I absolutely enlist those as well. But also am trying to use some of the new insights from queer interpretation, from feminist interpretation, from post-colonial interpretation, to really get at the richness of the text and how it can teach us something for today too. Okay, anybody else in your hide and seek game? Any other women you found? I could talk all day about this. I just want to make sure I get to the things that you had discussed or questions, especially that might have been lingering after your conversations.
One other thing I noticed through almost the whole book, there's this whole theme of toil. And of course, toil's attached to work, etc. But historically, the toiling has been the women, and most of the toiling is in the household chores. And I mentioned even currently, there's become a conservative backlash against a little bit of the feminism, the women around coming out and into the workforce, the Gen Z thing. Since the birth rate is lowering in the US, a lot of Gen Z women are responding and taking advantage of having fewer kids, and they're going back into the home and becoming stay-at-home mothers again. And so just I said the toil to the theme of it, and that's definitely a marker through female lives. That's all.
Right. That's great. Definitely a really important point in the book. And you're right. Toil is a theme in Kohelet. And I tried to focus on how that addresses women's lives in particular. So that's a great insight. Good job finding that one. Anybody else? Any other women you found? Nope.
Oh, I see. The camera's back there. Hello. Hi.
Hi.
Uh, where does the giving birth fit into this whole thing? This whole thing?
Okay. That's great. Giving birth. That's a good one. Excellent. I think you all are, you've got, I think, a good chunk of my list. Well done. Anybody else? I want to make sure everybody has their chance. This is the weird thing about Zoom teaching is I can't see your body language to know if you have something to say or hear you take a breath because you're going to say something. So I like to give some pregnant pauses here. Speaking of birth.
Would it have been easier for you when we raised our hand before we wanted to say something?
Not necessarily, but let me say this, that if you want to say something, please stand up and come to the microphone. And if I'm in the middle of a sentence, I'll just finish my sentence and then you can speak. So, all right, well, I'm gonna share my screen and go through some of the things that you've named and add some things also. But again, I want you to feel free to, if you want to raise your hand or just come to the microphone, I want to let this be a discussion to whatever extent you want to do that. So, here we go. Okay, can you see that all right? All right, so that was your question. I'll start with one that you didn't mention. And that is in chapter 2. In chapter 2, we get what is called the test of pleasure. And this is sort of Kohelet's life of luxury experiment to see if this brings the happiness, joy, meaning to life that the sage seeks. And so in chapter 2, it says, I'm going to try a test of pleasure in chapter 2, verse 1. And then it lists this long list of luxuries that the sage is going to acquire. And it's a really interesting passage to analyze because we see this, we really get the sense of a wealthy person who has the ability to acquire all these kinds of goods and services and this life of luxury. And in that list, we find a few things mentioned. One that's definitely about women, which is singers. So we have male and female singers. You can see there in the yellow. So this is chapter 2, verse 8. And then at the end of verse 8 in the green, we have several words that we don't know exactly what they mean in Hebrew. Delights of the flesh and many concubines. That's the New Revised Standard Version translation. But you can see on the bottom left here, I wrote with question marks, hapax. That means that this Hebrew word is one that doesn't appear anywhere else. And so scholars have to make educated guesses. They have to hypothesize about what that word might mean. Now, it's very similar to the word for breasts. So that has led a number of interpreters to suggests that it has something to do with concubines. It also is similar to the word for a coffer or a container of some kind, which some scholars have suggested might also be a reference to women. But in any case, we're not exactly sure what that means. But if we zoom back to the previous verse, we see that very clearly, no dispute in the Hebrew, it also mentions both male and female slaves. So this is part of this list of the life of luxury that Kohelet embarks on. And unfortunately, at the end of all of this, Kohelet concludes in chapter 2, verse 11. I considered all that my hands had done and the toil I had spent in doing it. And again, all was vanity or hevel and a chasing after wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. So even after all this, right at the beginning of the book, the conclusion is still hevel. But in the midst of it, we have these really objectified references to women. So that's one of the starting points here. And it has always been a concerning starting point for me in using a feminist critique. And this is one of those places where, in terms of using various methodologies, I'm trying to ask questions that come from some of those, like, what would it have been to be a concubine? It's essentially a sex slave. There's no consent allowed involved that matters. That wouldn't even have been a consideration. So, and of course, female slaves similarly. So, it tells us when we ask questions about economic structure and social structure and so forth, it gives us some insights we might have missed otherwise. And here's a couple of other translations for the end of that verse. Interestingly, the King James Version from 400 years ago translated that word that we don't know as musical instruments. And but that has really been an outlier in the history of translation. The newer translations usually go with something like chests or coffers, or here we have women and more women. But we can't, it's hard to really know for sure. So in one way, women are really hiding there. Okay. In terms of giving birth, which one of you had asked about, I think I mentioned this when I was there a few weeks ago, that at the opening of the poem in chapter 3, the correct translation in that first line is a time to give birth. And so I tried to expand that concept throughout the book and think about what it meant for ancient women's lives, this reality of their lives of giving birth. And one thing that it meant was that anytime we have a reference to death, I applied that to women, because childbirth was such a dangerous part of women's realities, ancient women's realities. The maternal death rate was so high. The infant mortality rate was very high as well. But it meant that women in particular were frequently grappling with death. And in fact, there's an interesting interpretation of Genesis 3, where after the first man and the first woman are sent out of the garden, and the woman says, "My desire shall be for my husband." And there's this dilemma there. And the dilemma, according to this interpreter, Carol Myers, is that women would have desired to be with their husbands sexually, but the dilemma was that it was so dangerous for them to give birth. And so anytime an ancient woman experienced a pregnancy, they were also really facing a potentially the end of their life. So that's another place where birth is referenced in the book. There's another one, and I don't remember the reference off the top of my head, but it talks about the author Kohelet talks about I would rather have been a stillbirth, which is quite a dramatic thing to say, and very painful for women who've experienced stillbirth or miscarriage. It's something that we also see in Job, but it really speaks to Kohelet's concerns about the hevel of life and the existential struggle that Kohelet was enduring. But it also, from my view and my interpretation, was quite ignorant and insensitive about the very real pain and struggles that women dealt with who did experience miscarriage and stillbirth, to just kind of use it as a little illustration in that way. And so I reflected on it in that way. So let me move on. Okay, one of the things that I really want to address, and we had a mention of queer interpretation, a queer lens, and in chapter 7, and we're going to spend a bit of time here on chapter 7, a fair bit. We have what I call gender bending. Well, it's not my term specifically. My rabbi friends in town here, Rabbi Abby Jacobson and Rabbi Juan Mejia, talked to me about Kohelet. And I said, there's this place in chapter 7 where it addresses the audience with the feminine form of you. Now, I've tried to explain this here. We've got a little bit of technical language, but I think you can get your head around this. So what we have written in the Hebrew is a feminine singular form of the word you in this verse. Your heart knows that many times you yourself have cursed others. But there's a traditional reading of this, which is written in the marginal notes, that adds one letter to this. You can see the one letter that's added here, which makes it a masculine form of you. And so it feels like there maybe are some women hiding in the audience here just by this interesting reading tradition, well, the written tradition versus the reading tradition of the text. But then things get even curiouser in chapter 7, verse 27. And here we have a verb. This is the verb for say or said in the past tense. So this is some more gender bending. This is in 7:27. So I saw this, or this I found, said Kohelet. So in order to conjugate the verb said, for a male subject, we would not expect there to be this letter that's in the red circle on the end of the word. But that's how it appears in the manuscripts, is there's this letter. It's like an H letter in Hebrew. Hey is what we call it. And it's the feminine form of the verb. So there's a feminine form of the verb used for Kohelet here in 7:27. Now, typically, for many years, scholars have made what we call an emendation, which is where they said, oh, well, the scribe just didn't move this letter far enough over to the beginning of the next word. So we'll just move this letter over. And then it says Amar ha-Kohelet, which means the philosopher said, and now the verb is in the masculine form. And that's not a strange emendation to make at all, because as you can see down here, early Hebrew manuscripts had little spacing between the words. And so maybe these words were bunched up together. Do you have a question? No. Okay. So, that's a really interesting instance of gender bending in Kohelet. And because of that, one scholar that I read, she talks about Kohelet as using kind of an old school terminology as transvestite, and almost as though Kohelet is kind of cross-dressing in some very hidden ways here. The thing that's really interesting about this, though, is that these two instances of gender bending in 722 and 727 are on either side of the most misogynistic parts of the book. And those parts, hang on, let me zoom ahead a little bit here. We'll stick with chapter 7 for a few minutes and then move back. All right, so here's the beginning of the passage, focusing on wisdom. And we talked about this a little bit a few weeks ago about the emphasis on wisdom in chapter 7. And then here's the misogynistic part. More bitter than death, the woman who is a trap. A net is her heart, ropes are her hands. See this I found. This is that verse where we have the feminine form. Seeking and seeking and seeking. And this verse, especially 726, has been used in very negative ways. So how negative, you ask? And we'll come back to this in a second, but here we go. Have you heard of the Malleus Maleficarum? Is the Latin term for a book that was the second only in popularity in the Middle Ages, early days of the printing press. Of course, the first most popular book was the Bible. And the second most popular book was the Malleus Maleficarum, which translates the hammer against witches. This was a witch hunter's handbook in the days of the so-called Great Witch Hunt of the 16th through 18th centuries, in which thousands of people, mostly women, were killed for being accused and condemned as having been witches. And in the Malleus Maleficarum, in one part of it, it quotes that verse multiple times, that more bitter than death is the woman who. And so that verse has been deadly for women throughout history. So the question that I think is important to ask is, could there be an interpretation to that passage that gives us some different insight? Different insight than how it seems to read. When you in this English translation on first glance, it seems to read as just any woman, every woman even, might be condemned in this way. And there's a great quote from Louise Erdrich. Does anybody know her? She's just such a wonderful Native American novelist. And she wrote this about that verse. These words have stood through time and thought, no doubt been spoken from pulpits, used to punish uppity and opinionated women, been cited as God's actual credo on the female subject. These are words that have done historical harm, and yet they were probably written in the same short-sighted spirit that any gender uses in complaining about the other. That barstool spleen, that's how she takes this, as a barstool spleen, taken as divine revelation, casts a sick pall upon the acquired wisdom of Kohelet. Such a good summary. This pointing out how that one verse, 726, and especially when we know about the history of the Malleus Maleficarum and how it was used in the Great Witch Hunts, this one verse can really put a shadow over the whole rest of the book, even though there's so much wisdom there. But what I want to point out is the reason that I had us look at woman wisdom in Proverbs when I was there a few weeks ago. Remember, wisdom shouts in the street and she calls the people to them. And then there's also her foil, woman folly, whose lips drip honey and her speech is smoother than oil and her feet go down to death. It seems possible that when we are looking at Ecclesiastes 7, you see how the sage is seeking wisdom, but is frustrated. She was far from me. Who can find it or her out? I'm searching for wisdom. What did I find instead? The woman who is a trap. I'm seeking, I did not find a woman in all these, I did not find. So I and many other scholars of the Hebrew Bible in this larger context of the wisdom literature have suggested that Kohelet may not at all be talking about womankind or even a particular actual human woman, but rather may be talking about either woman wisdom and Kohelet's inability to attain wisdom, or woman folly and the fact that Kohelet's trying to find wisdom but can only find folly. And so with that background of Proverbs, this is one place where maybe it seems like we've found the most obvious woman or women in Kohelet in chapter 7, but in actuality, what we may be finding here is a personification that was rooted in the book of Proverbs and that illustration of woman wisdom. Let me pause for a second there and just ask, does that make sense to you? Did you talk about any of that? Do you have questions about any of that? Or you can kind of just give me a thumbs up if you understand, or if anybody wants to come up and respond, you can do that. I'll pause for a second.
Just a side note, I just think a lot of part of the medieval hatred about witches is sometimes there was some gender bending in there too. So that was the pushing back a little bit, as it were.
That's a really good connection. Thank you. Yes, I didn't delve into that aspect of the Great Witch Hunts. I think I'm sure that is true, that there is some speculation about that. One of the really difficult things in researching the Great Witch Hunts is that a lot of that history is lost to us. And unfortunately, a lot of the graves are lost to us and the causes of death and so forth. So there's a lot of debate about who died and how many and where and when and why. But I think that's a really good point. Thank you. And an important connection. Okay, I want to move back. There was a slide I skipped here. And one of you have mentioned the focus on toil in the book as a whole. And this is definitely a theme in Kohelet. And I thought of this a lot as something that connected to women. Now, I do want to be clear that, of course, in the ancient world, men toiled as well, although the perspective of Kohelet from the view of a wealthy landowner gives us the sense that perhaps Kohelet did not toil in the same way as some other all those others, those slaves, for instance, and the concubines and the people who were planting the vineyards and the fruit orchards. But certainly in terms of the question about, or the focus on eat, drink, and be merry, remember carpe diem, something that occurred to me a lot was who is making the feast? If the goal is to eat and drink and enjoy your life, who is making the feast? So the passage that I'm referring to here on this slide with the messy rooms is chapter 5, verses 13 through 17. So I'll read that to you from the New Revised Standard Version. There is a grievous ill that I have seen under the sun. Riches were kept by their owners to their hurt, and those riches were lost in a bad venture. Though they are parents of children, they have nothing in their hands. As they came from their mother's womb, so they shall go again, naked as they came. They shall take nothing for their toil, which they may carry away with their hands. This also is a grievous ill. Just as they came, so shall they go. And what gain do they have from toiling for the wind? Besides, all their days they eat in darkness, in much vexation and sickness and resentment. Wow, quite a downer there. And it really gives this sense of repetitive work that has no payoff. And when I was working on my commentary, one of my rabbi friends said, well, you're supposed to read Kohelet in the Sukkah during Sukkot, which is the booth that Jewish communities build in the fall for the Sukkot festival. And so she organized a group of women clergy, Jewish and Christian women clergy, to meet in the Sukkah. And we talked about issues related to women in Kohelet. And one of the women there, Reverend Mary Gaudreau Hughes, she gave me this saying that I hadn't heard before. I don't know if it's an Oklahomaism or not. Maybe you can raise your hand if you've heard this before. Cleaning the house while children are growing is like sweeping the walk while it's still snowing. Have you heard that? Okay, maybe that's new to you also then. And I thought that was a great sentiment along the lines of what Kohelet is trying to express. So it seems like Kohelet's concern with toil is the fact that it doesn't really pay off. There is no lasting outcome. You can't take it with you, to be blunt. You can save as much as you want. And there are passages where Kohelet says you can pass it on to somebody and it may or may not go to them and they may or may not spend it wisely. So it's a real sense of, you could see it as futility or you could see it as freedom, I suppose, either way. But you're right. There's a lot of meditation here on, or maybe meditation is not quite the right word, but a lot of reflection or struggle, even agonizing on the topic of toil and what's it worth. And that also stands over against that focus on carpe diem, or seize the day, eat and drink and enjoy your life. So I guess instead of cleaning the room, you go to a different room or go out to your sukkah or something and enjoy a nice meal and hope you have someone who can fix the meal for you. Okay. While I'm pausing, if you have any comments or questions that you want to add here, go ahead. I have already mentioned the issue of, can I seize the day if I had to fix the feast as a response to eat and drink and enjoy yourself? It does seem like from the research that has been done on women's roles in ancient times that women would have usually been the ones to make the food and so forth, though men certainly toiled to grow and harvest food, as did women. Men also would slaughter animals and so forth. But one of the really fun examples is on the bottom of the slide here, and this comes from chapter 11, verse 1. Send out your bread upon the waters, for after many days you will get it back. Send out your bread upon the waters, for after many days you will get it back. Now, I'm curious. See, I'm gonna stop the share for a second. Has anyone ever heard an interpretation of that verse over the years? Have you ever heard anybody preach on it or say what they meant? They said it, say what it meant, or have you had an idea of what that verse meant? Send out your bread upon the waters, for after many days you will get it back. No. Okay. I see your heads shaking even from the back. I've heard it in some cases as a stewardship verse, kind of maybe a sense of karma. You get back what you receive, so give generously, that kind of thing. But some scholars who are very familiar with ancient archaeology have suggested something different, which I already gave away on my slide. So the suggestion is that this verse is about making beer. And the scholars I'm referring to here are Michael Homan and Jenny Ebling. And the most fun example I had of this is when I was teaching honors Bible and culture. I had a student who, when I read that verse, her hand shot up in the air and she said, "That's a beer recipe." Now, the reason that student knew that is because she was doing a chemistry internship at a local microbrewery. And so she knew how to make beer. She was learning about it. And in the ancient world, the way that beer was made was to bake bread, usually out of barley, and then put the bread in water and put a cloth on the top of it so that oxygen could get in and the carbonation could escape and bugs wouldn't get in. And after 7 days, the natural yeast in the air and everything would ferment that into beer. That's a very basic explanation. She's good at explaining it with chemistry and everything. So here's some pictures and from an article about this by Michael Homan, who first wrote about this possible interpretation. And what you see in this picture are some metal straw tips. So these would go on the end of a long reed, like the reed that grows on the side of a river or something, and pick the reed, hollow it out, and it becomes a giant straw. And you put the tip on the straw and you stick it down into the beer, and it strains out the beer from the debris of the bread down in the bottom of the beer jug. So those are some artifacts related to this process. Here's a great wood artifact from Egypt, from even well before biblical times, of a woman filtering barley bread to make beer. So the insight about where the women are hiding in this verse is that the women were the ones who made the beer. And Lance Allred, who's a scholar who sadly died just this year, had also done a great deal of research on how in a number of different societies, women were associated with beer making. So you can think of the English term like the alewife or the tavern keeper in the story of Gilgamesh, the tavern keeper is a woman. And so because women baked the bread and the bread was used to make the beer, the women made the beer. So if 11.1 is, as has been proposed, and I think is a reasonable hypothesis, if 11.1 is about beer making, then we have a woman beer maker hiding behind that verse. These are some other really interesting artifacts. And one thing that I think is fun here is that the historical background or recent history of these is that archaeologists had for some time speculated that these donut-shaped pottery pieces would have been used for weaving as a weight. But there were some problems with it. It didn't entirely work out. And then other archaeologists more recently have suggested that instead what they were used for is to put on the top of a jug. So if the top of the jug is 5 or 6 inches around and you've got the crumbled bread and the water in there and it's doing its magical fermentation, you put a piece of cloth over the top and then you put this piece of pottery on it that has a hole so that the carbonation can come out and the oxygen can get in, then it is a part of the beer brewing process. And here's a modern version of that. A student introduced me to the carboy. I don't know, maybe do we have some home brewers in the room? No home brewers. Okay, well, the next time you meet somebody who makes beer at home, you can talk to them about a carboy, which is basically a jug that has this fancy contraption on the top to allow water, air in and the carbonation out. And it's called open fermentation. And in fact, the student that I worked with on this topic, who worked at the brewery, talked to us about a particular variety of beer that this microbrewery in Oklahoma City makes that is created through what they call open brewing. And it sounds like a big vat that's open to the air, but that's not the case. It simply has some spouts like this where the oxygen is able to get in a filtered way and the carbon dioxide is able to get out. So a little fun exploration of beer brewing for you on a Sunday morning. This book here, these are some of the resources that I like to suggest. And if you all are interested, if you let Justin know, or if you just tell me, I can send a list of these to Justin, or you could take a picture of this or a screenshot, or I guess it's on video also. This book in the middle by Jenny Ebling, Women's Lives in Biblical Times, she has a section on beer brewing, and she's one of the scholars she's really an expert on the archaeology of ancient women. And this book is really wonderful because she tells a fictionalized story of an ancient woman in biblical times, and then each chapter is another part of the woman's life. And after she tells the fictionalized story, then she unpacks it and uses her archaeological expertise to talk about, here are the finds that help us know this about ancient women. And this book is written for lay people. I've used it in class before, but it's very accessible. And so I really highly recommend it. It's a fairly thin paperback book. So that's a great one to use. This Carol Myers I referred to in terms of her interpretation of Genesis 3. Tal Elon, Integrating Women into Second Temple History, is not for your regular Sunday school class, nor this one either, Phyllis Bird, but I wanted to give you my references so you could see the variety of scholars I was using to get this information about understanding biblical women. And as I note here in the subtitle, the tricky part is dating, because these books are using information about different parts of ancient times. And so it's not always clear what would have applied to the time period that we're looking at in Kohelet. So with that, I am going to take a long pause and or stop because I think that we are out of time or nearly out of time. And if we have any time left, I want to make sure and give you any opportunity to ask any more questions.
This isn't so much a question as just to let you know, I've really enjoyed this. I've been geeking out all over again like I was in seminary. So
That's great.
Very
Thank
much.
you. Good. I'm so glad. I love to help people geek out.
Lisa, thank you very much. Well, thank you, Lisa. Very happy to have made this happen and very appreciative of your time as you're in your summer and getting prepared to leave the country. We're all a little jealous, I'm afraid. So thanks again, Lisa. We really appreciate it. And let's give one more round of applause. Yes, yes, thank you. All right. See you later.
All right, thanks. And I hope I'll see some of you at Synod.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Well,
Okay,
friends.
bye, everybody. Thanks for
Bye.
inviting me.
Bye. Yeah, I know. I keep turning around this way, but it should turn that way. So friends, we'll have a couple of Sundays off.